everybody, I hope you're all well. My name's Diane, and as you can see from the wall behind me, this week's video is all about how I made the chandelier quilt. So if that's something you might be interested in, please continue watching. I think if you look closely, you might be able to just make out that it's only the flimsy. I've not long finished completing the top, but I'm hoping to record the video this evening. So it's 6 o'clock now, and so that I can have the day tomorrow to quilt it. So let's get on. So I was recently contacted by somebody on my Etsy shop, and she'd been looking at my back catalogue and she requested a chandelier quilt. I called it droplets when I put it on my Etsy shop, and she said that she liked that when it first appeared, but she didn't want it to be in browns. There were some browns in that. She wants bright colours with hints of blue but no brown, and so she asked if I would consider making one of those, and I said yes I would, and this is it. And this is the quilt that the customer is talking about. So if you look closely, you can see there are 28 droplets, and the quilt measured 46 by 54, so it wasn't very big, and this is what she's asked for, but I think I might make it slightly bigger. And so I did make it a little bit bigger. This has 36 droplets on, and it's 62 inches squarish. 158 centimetres. And if you saw last week's video, you'll see that I bought some Bethany salt fat quarter bundles, and it was called Dragonflies, and there were 5 pieces in the bundle. So nice bright colours, that's what the customer requested. And I bought some half yards of complementary colours to go with that. And I also, in the end, because I wanted it to look quite scrappy, I took fabric out from different areas from my scraps. So I really didn't have a plan for this quilt. I knew I wanted 36 droplets and it wanted to be bright, and I wanted to use those 5 pieces and then introduce more to make it look scrappy and add pops of colour, which I have done. There aren't any solids in. I almost, in my selection process, when I was gathering fabric, I did pick up this Kona solid. I did think I might take some from here, but in the end I didn't use any solids at all. They're all patterned or tone on tone. That is still a quilt to be made. And I knew I was going to have a white background, and I knew that the chains were going to be in black. So that was the start. So the background is going to be in this white floral, tone on tone, and then the chains are going to be in black. And then I just worked through the material that I had in my possession and started to contrast it, compare it with the Bethany salt and the black and white to see what would work, what could work, what might work, what I would reject. It was just a playing with fabric and colour process. So that watercolour plaid design has got all of the colours. I think that could work, so I'll put that aside. And then this pink, it works well with the lilacs, so I could use that. And the green, there's green everywhere, so that could be put to use, small amounts. And so could that chartreuse or green yellow swirl, that would work. And then we have that orange, again used sparingly. And then we have this jelly roll with all those different colour solids in. So the way I intended to construct these lovely droplets was to start off with a 3-inch 4-patch, and it would be 2 black squares, and then there would be 5 more rounds of colour going around that. So it's a sort of quarter log cabin. So the 3-inch square would be in the bottom left hand corner, and then the rounds would build around that until I had a 6.5-inch square, I think it measured at. So I had a rough idea then of how I was going to construct the droplets, and so I thought the next logical step would be to make sets of colour. So I thought I'd need 6 pieces of colour, and that's what I did next. I've decided now that that plaid isn't working. Beautiful fabric, but not for this quilt. To be honest with you, I soon got bored of making sets. I was taking pictures so that I would have a record of what I put together, but I couldn't remember what colours I'd put together, and I got fed up of doing it. I just wanted to start sewing. And so I did at that point disregard the Kona solids. I knew I wasn't going to use those, but all the fabrics that I like the look of, I just decided that I would start to cut. And this is what I used to cut my strips, 1 3/8. This ruler, I've been using it for many, many years. I do keep thinking I should change to a more conventional size, but I really like the way they look. And I've got lots and lots of strips in my stash now that are pre-cut, ready for projects like this. So I cut them all, and they were all on my ironing board. So that was my resource station, and I just needed to start sewing. And so I've been busy. I've just cut up all of these strips ready to go, and I've used one of the fat quarter bundles, cut that into strips completely, and I've added a few more darker colours for contrast, because when I was looking back at the images that I'd taken, it was only this navy blue that sort of stood out as the dark, and so I've introduced those. So taking those pictures of those sets wasn't a complete waste of time. I could see from that there wasn't enough contrast. So I'm going to start making some of the blocks, and I'll have a look and see what they look like. I completed set 1 and set 2, and I'm looking at the way they work together, and it's that orange that's really dominant in the dark. So there's 8 rows, and I'm going to introduce some of the new colours, the brighter colours now. So once I completed those 2 sets, the thing that really stood out was that orange. It really popped, and so I decided then that I would include a piece of the orange in all of the blocks. I also realised that just using the Bethany salts and the little half yards of fabric that I bought, the complementary colours, wasn't enough. I needed some real brights. And so what I decided to do was to make 2 sets. So I had a set of 4, and then I would have a set of 5. And in the set of 5, I would incorporate the real bright pops of colour, and I would distribute those all over the quilt. So the construction of these droplets is really easy. So I started off, like I said, with a 3-inch square, and I'll show you how I put that together. So this probably is the most important part of the block, is to get this cornerstone square. So that middle square there will fit into one of these squares here. So I'll square that up, and then I'm going to trim this down to 3 inches. So once I had that 3-inch square, I just constructed the rest of the block like you would a quarter log cabin. And now I want to continue adding strips around this block. And so you can see there's a seam here. That piece has no seam. This piece has 1 seam. And so I shall always start on the side where there's 1 seam. Starting with an accurate 3-inch square, I think was important to get a uniformity in those droplet sizes. And that's a finished block. It's been pressed and trimmed, and it measures 6 3/4 inches square. So you can see at the moment I've completed 2 rows of 5 and 2 rows of 4. There are another 2 of each to do. And at the moment I'm just placing the same colour blocks in the same row. But when I come to do the final layout of the quilt, I shall move them around. I'm not going to have them in lines like that. But I'm just looking at the moment for colour distribution. So the next row of 5, I'm going to have a nice bright piece of yellow. So like I say, I didn't have a plan for this quilt. I was just looking to see how the colours work together, and I'd started off with a row of 5 and that had the biggest pop of colour in, and because some of those brights were really bright, I thought I would construct those 4 rows first of all, and so that I could add some more subdued colours in the next 4 just to bring it down a notch. Well, I've completed those 4 sets of 5 and each of those has a bright in, so there's a pink, a green, a yellow and an orange. So I've only got 2 rows now of 4 to complete. So I've added that row of 4 blocks and there's 1 row left to do. But I've just made the decision that once I've completed this bottom row, I'm going to put an edge of blue around each of the blocks that I've completed. And the block now measures 7.5 inches when it's trimmed. So there was 2 reasons why I decided to add this blue border on all of the blocks. The first one was unity, so that it tied it all together, and that's the same blue that I'm going to use in the backing, and it's the same blue that's on the border, so that ties it all in nicely. But also, no matter how carefully I sew, some of the outer rings on this 5th row here, some of them were quite narrow in parts, or narrower, they weren't too bad, but because I trimmed them down to 6 3/4 inches, when I added a piece of that blue, it looks level everywhere, so it sort of balanced it up as well. Well, if you look at the bottom 4 rows of the quilt, you'll see that I've added that blue round, and I do think it makes the blocks stand out a little bit more, makes them appear richer. And there we go, I have now added all of that last round of blue to all of the blocks, but I've just imagined another layout. Well, I think that's such an interesting pattern. It's not what the customer wants, but I think in a future quilt there's lots of possibilities there. So I'm going to return the layout as it was, and then I'm going to move blocks around. And that's why we quilt, isn't it? We just finish one and then we think of another one to do. I mean, I didn't keep on playing with those blocks, but the possibilities. So again, there was no plan, it was just a bit of improv placing. I just put all the blocks back as they originally were, and then I was moving them around in pairs. So I just wanted to get good distribution really of the brightest colours. As long as they were throughout the quilt, I think it would all hang together. At the moment that looks like a good balance of colour, so I'm going to leave it there for tonight, and then in the morning I'll come back and have a look and see if there's any changes that I need to do. I think I mentioned, didn't I, that I'm filming on the evening. My husband's just come in, poured me a Guinness. I think I better hurry up with this filming now. Cheers. It's better than coffee, isn't it? Coffee would keep me awake all night. So the next thing I did was to create the little 4 patches in the black and white, and I used the little ruler again. This time I decided that I would cut that little 4 patch down to a 2-inch square, because I only wanted to have a 2-inch sashing everywhere, and that's what I did next. I needed 35 of those little 4 patches. Eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed the knee brace. I told you I wasn't sporty. I really think it's important that as we get older we look after our bodies and we do some exercises. I think it's important to stay mobile, to keep our muscles supple and strong, our bones strong, and I slipped over doing yoga. I know. The irony isn't lost on me. But I'm not going to say anything disparaging about yoga. I think it is a really good form of exercise if you're not clumsy like me. My knees are much better now though, thank you very much. That's a bit presumptuous of me, isn't it, to thank you for your kind words. I'm sure they're going to come. If not, why not? But I am better. Thank you for asking. So what I did was I just measured the block here, and then I added a 2-inch wide piece of sashing, and I attached that all the way along on the diagonal of each strip, so all the blocks were joined together. So I think if you look closely now at the blocks, you can see that I've added white sashing. That's 2 inches wide, and so I've joined all of the rows together, and I've started adding the little 4-patch, and I'll show you those. So you can see on the left of those 2 blocks that there is the white sashing, and then there is the 4-patch, the black and white 4-patch. So once I'd made all of those little 4 patches, I just cut strips in the white 2 inches wide, and I joined those to the edges of the blocks. So I'm making long strips of blocks with sashing on the diagonal. So I'll do this next row and I'll show you what that looks like. And that's the layout for that piece of sashing. So it starts with a 2-inch square, then it's the band of sashing and the blocks, and it finishes on a little 4-patch. And now I think you can see how those little black and white 4-patch in that sashing begins to form the chain where the droplets hang from on the chandelier. And so I shall continue doing that all the way along, and then we just have to put the edges for the on-point squares. Well, I've just finished adding all of the sashing, and I just thought it was a little bit strange that I haven't got more than 1 4-patch left of the black and white. And then if you have a look on the far bottom right, you'll see why. So I've got 2 blocks to unpick there. It's a good job I noticed those little 4-patch when I did, because I was expecting to have 3 of those 4-patch left over, and when there was only 1, I knew there's something was afoot. So anyway, I noticed it before I sewed up the quilt or added the little cornerstones to square up the quilt. And so I managed to unpick those and put the white squares in. Close one, that one. So I'm really sorry, but I haven't got a formula for how to put in those bits that are missing when you're on the diagonal because of the on-point squares. But what I did was I measured the block with the sashing, which was 9.5 inches. So if I was going to put in a whole square of white on the end, the missing bit, it would have been 9.5 by 9.5. Well, I thought if I measure 9.5 by 11, I could sew in that square, and then as I add the next piece, I could cut it level, so straighten it up, and the piece that came off was long enough to fit another missing piece on another square. And that's how I squared up the on-point square. So measure the square, add a couple of inches, trim it off, and use that piece elsewhere. And it worked, it came together. And then I put on a 2.5-inch border all the way around, and like I say, that is going to be the same as the backing fabric. So that's it for this week. So I'm just going to edit this now, ready so that I can upload it tomorrow, ready for the weekend, and I'm going to spend the weekend quilting this, and I will see you again next week. I have no idea what I'll be doing next week, but hopefully this will be finished so I can show you that. So if you are still with me, cheers. I'm not sponsored by anybody, not Guinness or any other company for anything, but we'll have a little sip of that in a little while. So thank you very much for your company if you're still with me, and I will see you again next week. Take really good care of yourselves, enjoy your sewing, and have a lovely weekend. Bye.